Guess it'd be better if I added myself to the stage. Yeah, I had to shut it all down and reinitialize it without the Facebook link. So yeah, I have to appeal to Facebook and see what's hell. I guess what happened in one of our priors, a lot of times when we talk about certain things like uh, certain fruit seeds, and some of the toxins in those, I think some of the people in the crowd mentioned maybe mentioned, something about, a drug could be made with one of those. And maybe that's what they're, I mean, I don't know how they expect us to control comments, but um, yeah, this is not about drugs. I know last week we had a lot of talk about marijuana, but I don't think that they don't really mind marijuana talk. It's legal in a lot of places, and you know, there's a lot of people that smoke, on their podcasts, and I wouldn't have that, and have people smoking bongs or something. I can see that maybe being, you know, something they don't would frown on, but I don't think it was any of the weed talk. So we'll just have to see what it was and deal with that. But yeah, we're just gonna be streaming to YouTube tonight, I guess. Make sure Clint's able to see it. Don't see him in the comments. Come on, J Man. When you run a still and the heads are coming off, does the amount of heads vary between runs? Yes, it will, and it varies between, even if you have the same distillate. A lot of times heads, more heads will be created during the fermentation process, and certain stresses on yeast can create more heads, and certainly different types of distillates like brandies, for example, tend to have a lot more heads than a grain, mash, which would also have a grain mash would have probably more heads than a sugar wash. So it tends to heads tends to be a lot of it's created by a lot of the vegetable and fruit matter in the cell walls and stuff that are actually in the grains and the fruits themselves. I know using pectic enzymes, which breaks down a lot of the cellular walls and cellulose, creates more heads as well because of that breaking it down. You're creating more wood alcohol. So yeah, it definitely will, and that's why you really can't go by just amounts. Everybody says the 50 milliliter per gallon thing, which is kind of a good catch-all. If you're not able to do it by smell and taste yet and don't have that experience, then it's a good average to go by. But sometimes you're going to have more than that, sometimes you're going to have less than that. So it's real important that you learn to get that distillate on your hands, rub it and feel it for oils and slickness. Rub it between your hands and smell it, and see if it's something that makes you tear up, or get that acetone, smell. So that's a couple of the ways to do it. But yeah, I guess it's gonna be a YouTube thing tonight, boys and girls. That's awesome, man. There's quite a few lurkers. That's all right. There's a lot of people that like to, just sit back and listen. And on the DIY page, we've got it set up so you can use aliases. I know a lot of people want to kind of remain anonymous for obvious reasons, so you can use aliases and nicknames in there. So if you have questions, you can still ask. Just if you don't feel comfortable asking under your name, just create a little nickname for yourself. I'm not sure how to do that on Facebook yet. Let me turn these comments on. Of course, it won't be as tough tonight, really. I guess I have to turn comments on so we can see them all. I guess all the YouTube ones. I don't know if you're on Fillbillies. Hopefully, you can see the militias, and the militias can see Fillbillies. I'm not sure if that's an issue, so I'll leave those up there just in case. But yeah, Facebook is. I've offended somebody there. I don't know. They said something about in the podcast we have in November 22nd, but there was some drug references, and the only time I remember any time drug references being mentioned is when we talk about, some toxins in certain, pits like cherry pits and stuff like that. And sometimes, people in the viewers will say, oh, that's what they synthesize MDMA or something like that with or something. So yeah, we don't want to, mention that or do any of that, anymore and try to eliminate that. I don't see how that's a big issue. Somebody could Google that and get that information, but it's not like we're advertising that or teaching somebody how to actually do that. We're trying to make it safe that they don't get that, right? That they don't do that. So I don't know. It's Facebook, so we'll have to appeal and deal with that. But for now, this is, and I don't know if it was somebody watching or somebody reported us or something. I don't know. We'll just have to play it by ear. Yeah, 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 let's not, if even if we talk about certain, compounds or something, like we talked about before. Yeah, let's no longer mention any drugs or anything like that. It's a shame that grown women can't speak. This is adults only thing, and we're not promoting drug use or anything like that. So, and I don't know. Good to have you with us, Pistolas. Yeah. It's you can go back and watch on the Philbilly Moonshine on YouTube. Uh, go back to his page. You can watch all our past episodes on your live on him. And I'm going to have to go back and watch the 22nd to see what the hell was said, that pissed him off. So I don't know, but I guess I'll have to go back and watch that episode and see what was said. I know it's going to be something stupid and simple, because we don't sit and talk about drugs and all that in here. We talk about making whiskey and liquor and wine and beer and shit. Yeah. What alternatives can you use for alpha and glucose enzymes, amylases? You can use malted grains. Malted grains work well. You can malt your corn and and use that, and it'll help self convert somewhat. But you have to change your cooking process considerably, and it's a very long, arduous process. So really, there are some natural enzymes in there, that you can use, but you have to watch your temperatures to keep from denaturing them. Again, you can use some malted grains. I think sweet potato skins have quite a bit of enzymes in them as well. But again, you have to just watch your temps, and it's best if don't get in a pinch. There's nothing rushing it. If you want to just make a mash and use some sugar and rush it that way, you can. But I wouldn't. I don't know of a lot of good alternatives other than just like malt, malted grains and stuff. And like I say, I know sweet potato skins have some amylase in them, and there's a lot of other natural forms of amylase. But the issue with that is the temperatures, right? So you'd have to gelatinize your corn and then bring it down, and then maybe add those skins and then dosing. I'm not sure how many skins would be required and how many potato skins, or other natural forms of alpha and beta glucanase would be required. So it's going to be a big issue trying to figure out how much. So I'd say, just postpone it until you can get them in, or just, if you have to run something, you want to run something, just run old thin mash, just run some cornmeal, sugar, and yeast, and just run your thin mash and run that through. It's not the best, but in a pinch, it'd make a good drink. Okay, drink. It's a little bit hot, but it'll work. But I would say there's really no alternatives for using a good malted grain or just exogenous enzymes, especially the high temp and the liquid glucose. Really, that's want to keep those on hand and never run out of those, man. But yeah, malted grains works good, but it'd be hard to try to find some other natural. I mean, it'd be easy to find one, but finding the right dosage and then how long to cook it, and definitely you would want to do an iodine test to see what kind of conversion you're getting. And I'd say it's going to be pretty heavily impacted if you're not using enough of these natural sources. So, but there are a lot of natural sources for it. There's a lot of different funguses and goji and other things that you can use to help break it down. You can use the yellow label angel yeast and not need any at all. If you don't have, if you've got that, you can, but it has to be the right brand, the right type of the yellow label angel yeast. Um, so it has to be the yellow label, the distiller yellow label um, variety, and it'll break it down. But yeah, there's that and malts is the best natural sources. All right, so let's see. Jay's got a ton of questions. Awesome. So we'll have some to talk about tonight. Looking at getting a still. I'm not sure what one yet. You like mead, and it's awesome. All right. Well, you came to that place. Um, really depends on how much you can afford to spend. A lot of people would instantly recommend you get a copper still and nothing else. And if you do, you're crazy and all that. But as more time passes, we're finding that it's expensive now that copper's up, and you can get pretty good results out of a stainless steel pot. So it's not necessarily uh, a must have or uh, the only way to do it, or the best and only way to do it, because we now know that you can add copper mesh to the vapor path and get the same impact, as close to the same impact as using copper. Copper is going to heat more evenly. It's going to take out sulfites a little better than well, much better than just stainless alone. But if you add the copper mesh and no steel plated, no copper plated steel mesh, it has to be 100% copper. That copper plated steel mesh is nasty. It'll mess up your runs. But here, just a simple little beverage still is a great place to start for beginners and intermediates. You can get this up to 18 and a half gallons, and you can use it on your stovetop. If your stovetop is a continuous on, you got to make sure it doesn't cycle on and off, heat on and off, and cut on and off. Or you can use it on a turkey fryer or under a banjo burner, or I don't think I would want to use that under an open flame. But I guess you could, if you had a wood burning stove, and it got hot enough on top that you could, set it in that. You could set it in a double boiler if you wanted to. You could set it in a boiling pot of water. And I've got a friend that does that. He uses boiling water around it, kind of makes like a little jacket, and distills that way. So there's a lot of different ways you can, but something like that, or a keg still. Just a plain old beer keg. Let me see if I can find a picture of a beer keg with a little column on it. Here we go. Or something like that, where you can just use a 15.5 gallon beer keg, and you can buy your little column to fit on it, and you can use a Liebig condenser like that one, or get you a good shotgun condenser, or you can go straight into a copper coil, worm, which is probably be the best way to do it. But and you can put your mesh in that little sight glass, or in the above the deflegmator there, that's right above that sight glass. You can, in that little tube area there, you can put your copper mesh in there to help take out the sulfites. So I think a keg steel or one of these bevers, either one is going to be a good start. The bevers, the 18.5 gallon run you about 230, 250, sometimes 200 around this time of year. Get it on a Black Friday deal, even cheaper sometimes. Um, so it's pretty decent rig for that price. Now the kegs, you're going to pay probably 35, 45, 50 bucks for a keg on marketplace, just a regular old beer keg, right? And you take the spear out very carefully, relieve the pressure, and take the spear out, clean it out real good, and you can buy you a little column, or if you're a bunch of people, you can get your little cap put on there, and go into a worm or a thumper or jar rigs, and that works real well too. But you're going to have, that's not going to, it's not going to be, you're not going to be able to run after you buy the keg, right? You're going to have to get the other parts and get everything together to make it work. Whereas if you buy this, you get everything at once. So you see the little football on top of that. That's why they call this the football still. And this is great for bourbons, meads, brandies, that type of thing. Probably not the best for, vodkas and gins. You could probably do pretty decent gin though in this, hanging it, get a little bit by hanging some botanicals in the football. But you can pack the football with copper, and you don't have to use this canister. Everything's tri-clamp from the pot on up, just like on your keg. You got a tri-clamp here, and Philbilly he'll sell you. He sells. You have to have a special gasket right there on top of the keg because it's just a one side grooved gasket, whereas on these they have grooves on both sides. So it's a little bit different gasket, but yeah, they can build you a nice little copper cap to go on top of that keg, and you can build a worm, or they can build you a worm, and you can be going in no time. You set that right on a turkey fryer or a banjo burner, and that's really what you want, is a banjo burner. But yeah, it's that would be a really good place to start, for a beginner. These, I would recommend 13, 15, 18 gallon, a little bit bigger, so it makes it worth your time. And that's if you get the 15 and the 18 and a half, really not that much difference in price, like $20. So, you know, but again, if you do it on your stovetop, you really got to be careful and make sure that either A, it's a gas stove, that you just get constant heat. But if it's an electric stove, you got to make sure that your coils in there don't cycle on and off. That when you get near high, they just stay on. Now some of them will cycle and kind of regulate heat, and some of them will just give that amount of heat, and that's it. Like some of the older ones, my older one, just the dial is the amount of heat that you get, and it stays constant. So that works great. Now some of them, like nowadays, like to cut on and off and thermostatically control, and just throw a bunch of heat, bunch of heat, none, bunch of heat, none, and cycle on and off, and those aren't real good to use on a stove. So you gotta know how your stove works if you're going to use a stove. If not, running it above propane burners. Banjo burners are the best. um, a lot of the turkey fryers, they come with like a jet burner, which has one output kind of focused in one area. Those are great for boiling water and all that, but they tend to scorch if you use them improperly distilling with. So some people put a little deflector plate up there to kind of spread the heat out from that a little bit, or get a good banjo burner. I'm not sure if I have a picture of a banjo burner in here or not. Let me see. No, but I can pull one off the internet real quick for you so you know what I'm talking about. So just one moment. Let's see here. Get a good picture of one. Here we go. That's a good picture of one. As just any. They come in different colors, so you don't necessarily have to find a black one or a silver one. Here we go. That'll be a little better. Bigger picture of it. All right, let me share that here so you can see what I'm talking about. And for everybody else other questions, just a minute, we'll get to you. So if I don't answer your questions right off, don't get mad at me. I take these as they come. So we'll get to you. I don't want people to get mad at me because I'm not handling, because I get behind a little bit. I've been known to get behind a little bit. Well, hang on it. I did the screenshot. Come on, screenshots. You're not going to show. Let me go up here. There we go. All right, that's a banjo burner. You can see all the little gas outlets that it has. This spreads heat over a large area, and it does a really good job of even heating, which is important. You don't want all that focused in one spot, especially with stainless, because it lets that heat straight through there, and it doesn't spread it out like copper does as well. And you'll tend to try to scorch a little bit if you don't. So, banjo burner, I think that's a 10-inch. They come in different sizes. The 10-inch is a pretty good one. They get really hot, and they can boil your water pretty quickly too. And use a 20 psi uh, regulator with it. Cuts on 90 proof apple brandy. Well, what you want to do is you just make your cuts not on proof. Just make your cuts based on what it smells like, right? And feels like, especially the smell. You're going to smell these odors, and once they go away, you'll know that you're kind of in your hearts, and that can fall at any proof. And that proof depends on your steel. So you'll start out at maybe 140, 50 proof, and when you get into your hearts, you may be at 140 proof, and in your hearts all the way to down to 100, 110, 190, and then start getting into your tails. And it varies depending on, of course, the distillate. So you can't just go by proof alone. But once you get your hearts cut out, then you can proof that down with some distilled water, or sweet water, and proof it down to whatever proof that you feel is best. Different brandies are probably going to have different flavors coming through at different proofs, but 90 is a pretty good proof. 80, 90, 100, depending on the brandy, is a pretty good proof. And pretty much a standard for a lot of brandy. Some go down as low as 60, and then you have to deal with, is this going to be a post flavored brandy? Like a lot of the commercial ones where they add a lot of flavors and syrups and sugars and artificial flavors, natural flavors, and proof it down to 60, and it's just really sweet and good. Or is this going to be pretty much a brandy that's all mostly alcohol, not nothing post flavored? That's going to make a big difference as well. Yeah, so hopefully you de-pitted those before you put them in the processor. But yeah, with the fruits like that, once you get them above 160 and kill off a lot of stuff, you don't have to really, be concerned with anything else. Killing a lot of the bacteria on there and killing all the, wild yeast off of it and things like that. So it's not like a grain that you have to gelatinize and getting the starches out, because we're just using pretty much the fruit itself will have the fructose, so it'll be already a simple enough sugar for our yeast to eat, and we can just heat them up. And it's good. I like doing mine to about 160, 170 to kill everything off there, and then bring them back down. Now certain fruits that may have some toxins that need to be cooked out or something like that, some fruits, it depends on what it is you're using. Most common fruits don't. But yeah, it's just make sure you get the pits out and don't grind those up, and yeah, just bring them up to 160. Pour some 160-degree water over them. You don't have to actually cook them. You can steep them in 160 plus, and then let it cool, and then add your sugar. Use your hydrometer and add your sugar, and shouldn't want a whole lot of water. You want to keep it as fruity flavored and strong fruit flavors as you can, and keep a lot of those sugars, and use a lot of the natural sugars. So the more water you add, the more um, regular sugar you're going to have to add of some sort to help bring your gravity up to make it where you're going to get a decent yield. But yeah, sounds good, man. How did it work out so far? Thank you, Gay. I hope you have a good New Year too, brother. Yeah, I hope we get this Facebook thing ironed out. That kind of sucks, but we'll get it worked out. It's nothing. It can't be anything bad. I mean, we don't dwell on that. I'd say somebody said something. Somebody's made a complaint. Yeah, that's a good point. You have to keep your thumper pretty warm because that's forming a second distillation in there, and your steam going into it will keep it pretty warm. You just want to keep the distance between your steel and your thumper pretty limited. That way, the steam that's coming from your boiler doesn't have time to cool and condense into your thumper and have trouble keeping it warm, right? So, the shorter that can be, the better it tends to be. So you don't want to like have a big cap and then, have a lint arm coming out and then like, a few feet more of just another spool, and keeping it further away. And if you can keep it fairly close to to the to the steel and get maybe some ambient heat coming off the propane, that doesn't certainly doesn't hurt either. But yeah, it can add a little extra challenge, during the cold months, as can using a big cap, having a big cap outside and having all that cool air, hitting that cap and keeping it cooler than it normally would during the summer months. You're going to see your proof rise up. You're going to get more reflux. You're going to, get some more passive reflux from that cap, and your proof is going to go up. And maybe some people might consider that a good thing. Some people might consider that, well, it's gonna, we're gonna only we're gonna maybe lose some flavor at the same time. So that's always a consideration as well. Yeah, 10, 13, 15. It's all the bigger it is, it's easier to make cuts and learn to do your cuts. So the smaller the steel, it really is the harder to learn on. Uh, it's small, compact, and you don't have to make as much mash where you probably can limit your losses if you if you mess something up for sure. Um, but I would say a 10. I wouldn't go less than 10. 10 is a pretty good standard. 10 to 15. 18 and a half, which is that better. They have those. They've got 10, 13, 15, 18 and a half. So any of those sizes be fine. I tend to go a little bit bigger because what happens? Somebody buys a 10-gallon and they use it a few times and they're like, man, I love this. This is awesome. It's great. This is turning out better than I thought it was going to. And listen to old Clint, and he's got me making the best liquor ever. And man, I wish I had gotten a bigger steel. And next thing you know, you're going to be buying a 15 or 20-gallon steel. So I say if you get you a 15 or 18, it puts off upgrading for a little while. What's going on, Mr. Aubrey? Good to see you, brother. And I'm already a little bit behind. Yeah, we're just running on YouTube tonight, Jimmy. Facebook got mad at me. I don't know what I said that made them mad. I said something about a drug reference about a month ago. So we have to look it up. I don't know. A month ago? I don't know. Do they watch that stuff that long ago? There's somebody reporting it. I don't know. 20, yeah. Well, you want to kind of size your steel to your fermenter. So, you know, if if you got a 20-gallon, you're not going to be able to run full 20 on it, depending on how they gauge it, or and advertise it. Sometimes they'll say 20 if it's 20 to the absolute tippity top. You can't run it that way, or you'll puke over, right? So, and some, measure it to the top of the right before the cape, right? So, I would say in most 20s you're going to run about 18. So in that case, you want to have about a 30-gallon fermenter or a 25-gallon fermenter to give you plenty of headspace, to work with, and because your caps can sometimes get pretty big, and you get quite a bit of waste. There's a lot of grain left over and a lot of moisture that stays in the grain that you don't get pressed out. So you're going to make probably 20-25 gallon mash so you can get 18, good clear mash to run. If you have any left over, that's fine. You can always throw it in the thumper or in a jar rig, or you know add it to your next distillation, or sour mash it. There's lots you can do with it. But um, yeah, I tend to say, start a little bit bigger, because it'll avoid you from having to buy that second steel reel. I don't know how many times I've seen it, boys. Trust me. I've seen people get the 5s and 8s and 10s, and in a month or two after they do this a few times, they're like, man, I need a bigger steel. And they so yeah, and it's not all bad, because a lot of times they end up using those 5 or 10 gallon steels as thumpers, right? They convert them to thumpers and start using them for thumpers, and so that's not all bad. I agree. Yeah, thumpers are kind of a intermediate to advanced tool, and it was kind of crazy the way Bever made these 3-pot steels for beginners, and have beginners using thumpers, because it's really not necessarily the best way to learn, for sure. I mean, it adds a lot of extra complexity to it, like you were talking about filling up and not getting enough warmth, and being too close or not far enough, or filling up and condensing and puking over. There's just because they're always undersized on those Vivers. You got a big 5 gallon pot and a 1 quart, a teeny 1 quart thumper that basically makes a little puke box. Right. Yeah. It is. The bigger steels, the easier cuts are to make and more distinguished. They're going to be more distinguishable from each other, and you don't want to get discouraged because you're getting heady liquor or not getting the amount of hearts you expect, or you're getting some smearing. Right. Yeah, that's the best way to do it, for sure. um, Best be outside and safe, or in a shine shack or out back, or but weather, can sometimes drive you into the shack. A lot of people use this little shack, in which case, when you're enclosed like that, you just have to watch out for leaking, vapor and vapor buildup and things like that. But yeah, just keep your CO2, monitor out there, and little CO2 detector, so you don't, and also, if you run a propane, learn to adjust that gas. I see a lot of people with a lot of yellow in their flame, and that's not properly adjusted. You want to adjust it to where it's mostly blue with just little tips of yellow, right? So learn to adjust those burners. They got little adjustments on them, and air mixes the ratio of air gas. So adjust those, because if you get a lot of yellow, you're going to get a lot of carbon monoxide as well, and that's not going to be good, and it's not efficient. You'll run through your gas quicker. What's going on? Yeah, Billy. Good to see you, brother. Damn, I didn't far behind already. Lord have mercy. Now, electric, using the that's something I'm getting ready to tool up and do, and it works great. I've always been skeptical of it, and I've kind of waited around to see how everybody else and taste theirs and be judge, and you know it doesn't scorch like I thought it would. Now you're not going to want any kind of solid in there near that element, or you might get some scorching. I've seen some horror stories. Um, but and you definitely don't want to run the liquid out to where it's exposed to air, because that'll ruin them. But getting a good stainless element is important, and getting an SCR that gives you a good solid, heat instead of a PID that, again, kind of like the stove, flashes heat on and off and more thermostatically controlled. You want to be able to just dial that heat up and down and it just be a constant heat. And that's what your SCR will allow you to do. So go with the SCR and a good stainless element. Again, Fibly makes those kits for you if you don't have the expertise and the knowledge to do the electrical work, um, you know, trust those that do, and they got some pretty good little setups that it's a lot more efficient. And it seems to me that the people that do run the electric tend to run a little bit more because of its ease, right? It's so easy just to plug it, flip it, turn it on and go. You don't have to get the tanks. You don't have to deal with, oh shit, got to refill. You got to go to got to run to Home Depot or the gas station and refill the tank and come back and do all that. So it's a lot more efficient. But yeah, let me send let's see here just a minute. I got Clint answer those questions right now, brother. I gotta send you a message here about what happened. All right. Yeah, there's lots of plans online. And it's, if you're not electrically inclined and never done anything like that, probably not the best time to start because it is 220, and you're dealing with pretty high amperage. So it's not like, wiring you know, a switch or a plug, but it's pretty easy and basic once you see, but it getting the right parts and getting ones that are dependable, making your little box, cutting your box out, mounting everything in the box, and getting the right size of wire and getting proper fittings for, fitting to the element. Um, you got to do a little research on that for sure. Yeah, electric is a lot cheaper and convenience. It's just so much more convenient. And again, a lot of times though, it brings people inside, near their stove outlet or their clothes dryer outlet, which a lot of people plug into. But if you got like an air compressor outside for your for your HVAC system, and you got a pretty good sized box out there, you can turn your AC off in the house and just have your little plug mounted into that box and use that instead. Or wire your box, to the outside. But it is a lot more convenient and cheaper. Well, a lot of those are 3-pot setups, so you got to be really cautious about the 3 pots. Um, there are a lot of issues that have to be resolved on those 3-pot steels that Bever has out. If you use this football steel that they have out, you're going to be a pretty good shape. The gaskets on the rim on the lid of that are good. The gaskets between the football and the tri-clamp makes it modular, and the fact that this has a ferrule on top of your pot makes it modular. You can take this football off. You can add, columns and a cap and a whole host of other things, and it just makes it a lot more easily adaptable than the old 3 pots. Those old 3 pots are going to require work. They're cheap, and if cost is a factor, uh, you can get them, and you can but you're going to have to do some modifications. So if you're not very handy, and time's money, so sometimes it might be better just to get something like this that you don't have to work on, or the keg, that all you have to do is just buy the part and be done with it, or build your little cap and be done with it. And in the kegs, you can take them and get them welded. They'll weld a 2-inch ferrule in the bottom of them, and you can run your elements into that, or you can do the same on these bevers. They can weld you a little 2-inch ferrule on one side of them, and you can run you an element in there and use electric on these just the same. Yeah, yeah, definitely get the football. They've also got one that looks like a milkshake top. Don't I'm not too sold on those either. It kind of has a condenser built into that, and it's like right on top of the steel where there's most heat. You're trying to keep water cool to condense with. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. So they seem to work okay, but get the football. It has the tri-clamp fitting, which makes it more modular. The I don't think the milkshake looking top one does. So again, that's the football. So remember what it looks like, and either that or a keg steel. Kegs are real cheap and easy to get, and so are these little columns you can get for it. Like say Phil Billy and about every other builder out there can build you. I think Phil Billy and Ian specialize in bever caps, making caps for bevers and making caps for kegs. So you can go directly from your keg into a whiskey cap and out into a copper coil or a worm, or a shotgun condenser, whatever. But yeah, it's a pretty good way to start for sure. Well, like we're saying, you can get copper mesh, and let me see here. This minute, I'll show you what I'm talking about. Yeah, I'm not sure if this particular one. Yeah, this is 100% copper. It says it on there. So, but be wary. Look in some of the when you order it. Make sure you look in some of the comments and stuff, and make sure that people are saying, yeah, this is it. This is not. But this copper mesh. Now it comes in 5 inch. This is 5 inch by 150 feet. So what you do is you just pull off this 5 inch and you just loosely roll you up a round ball, and you can put it right inside, right above, inside that sight glass there, right above the keg. You'll see that little glass part. You can put it in there, or right above that, you see there's two outlets. That's a deflegmator, a deflameter. And above that, you got a spool, or you can put that copper in that spool right above that deflameter. And when that vapor goes through, and it'll have to be forced through this copper mesh, it will remove the sulfites sufficiently, as well as copper steel. So, but with the copper steel, there's a lot of maintenance involved. So, it is the best way to go, but there's a lot more work involved. And now that we have the copper mesh, the benefits have been diminished, and some people just don't feel that it's worth the maintenance anymore, because it just doesn't hold that big huge benefit as it once did about removing those sulfites. Now that they can just put that copper mesh in the vapor path and remove all those sulfites, because once those sulfites touch that copper, they instantly just bond to it, right? They it's like a magnet. They just bond to it. They love it. And you can pull that mesh out after each run and rinse it out, get those sulfites off there, and drop it in some water. And if it gets tarnished, you can put some vinegar on it, clean it up a little bit. And once you use them about 3, 4 times, they get a little bit more raggedy. You don't want to use them anymore, pitch them or recycle them and pull you off another round thing. These rolls last you a little while, but 100% make sure that it does say 100% copper mesh. You do not want copper plated steel. It's a lot cheaper. Don't go for it. It will rust right in the middle of your run. It breaks down. It will ruin your run. Floaties everywhere. Copper, metal, it's horrible. It will ruin a run. So don't go. Don't get it. So make sure, read some of the reviews, make sure, because anybody can say 100% copper. I know a lot of times this stuff coming from other countries that don't necessarily tell us the truth all the time. Not going to mention any names, China, but so, read some of the reviews, make sure that, yeah, this works well, because a lot of people are using it for that. Rashi Kalmusha, Samogon, Samo meaning self-gone, something like run. All right, self-run shot. I like it. I like it. Now, have you ever heard of Silvovich? That's kind of an Eastern Bloc moonshine made with plums. I make a little bit of Silvovich from time to time. I'm sure I'm butchering that pronunciation, but so it's Silvovich. Let me see. I've never heard anybody actually pronounce it, so let me Google it. Hopefully I can spell it. Actually, I did spell that right. No, S-L-I. Oh, I thought it was S-I-L. It's S-L-I. Slivovich. It's a brandy, yeah, plum brandy. Let's see if I can get it pronounced. Slivovich. Slivovich. Okay, that's close. And they like that vodka too, man. Yeah. Well, thanks for tuning in, Roman. we're out here every Tuesday and Saturday, 8 Eastern US time. So we started about an hour ago. So yeah, tune in if you got any questions. I don't know. Do they allow distillation in Russia? Is that something that everybody does, or is there rules against it? I don't know. Yeah, I'd like to learn more about it. So what's going on, GJ? We're just podcasting to YouTube tonight because Facebook got us for mentioning drugs on one of our prior podcasts. I don't know what it was, or I'm thinking when I was talking maybe about not being sure not to crush up the cherry pits, that there's some toxins in there. Maybe some references were made to certain drugs that you can synthesize from certain things, and we don't. So we can't talk about drugs anymore on here. We're definitely going to try to keep it clean because, you know, they're watching. Some people are reporting, and, so we got to watch out for it. Yeah, man, they make some pretty interesting combinations, man, for sure. I enjoy tasting them too. Yep, and you're gonna have to start coming to some of the moonshine festivals that we have, and everybody brings their little, brings in their best and passes it around. Everybody gets to sample it. It's a lot of fun, man. Yes, you can get it's a certain amperage, right? So 110, I think you can go up to like a 30 amp, which is pushing it, and that's most breakers will handle 20. And a lot of people are going with dual 110s because they don't want to deal with the 220. They want to run extension cords or something like that. So um, your wattage, your uh, element wattage is going to be cut back, and it's going to take a little bit longer to do. But you know, it's it works fine. I know some, and when you do use 110 and you have two of them, just make sure that you got them plugged into different branch circuits. You can't plug them both on the same branch, or it's going to blow that one breaker. So you got to have it on a couple of breakers to make it safe. But yeah, you could use, some people do that, use two because they don't, they're in apartments or in a place they rent, so they can't really, retool or, run new wires or anything like that. But some people just get adapters and plug into where their dryer is and use that, or plug into where their stove is and use that, which works out as well. Yeah, a lot of them you just put the wire in and tighten it down. I will say, if you're going to do that, I'm going to take the extra step of heating it up and put some silver solder on there, and just so just good connection, and doesn't that fraying doesn't tend to get moved around and broken off. Little legs tend to get broken off over time, so it might give it a little bit more structural integrity. But yeah, they use copper, and if you do use aluminum, make sure you use that antioxidant paste on it so it doesn't, corrode. Best just use copper though. Yeah, don't get just a little teeny electric box, like a junction box. Don't try to make a junction box when it's going to be tough. Get you a decent size little. You can get these little breaker boxes actually, and just have your breaker and everything all in one, and just have your dials and displays and your switch on one, and you can have a breaker right above it coming from the breaker, and feed right out of your box, and you can use those. Yeah, it's good to see you on YouTube, brother, instead of Facebook. Yeah, I guess we're gonna have to put the word out on Facebook till we can get that straightened out. Sure some people are celebrating. Yeah, there's lots of different plans, and you want to make sure when you buy your controllers, if you do, a lot of the 240 ones are made for one leg 240 because that's why Europe is. All their stuff is on 240. They don't have 110 wiring in their home. Everything's, you know, one leg 240. Whereas here we have two 120 legs to make, you know, 240. So it's going to be a little bit different. So make sure when you're buying it, make sure you get the right one, or you know it's not gonna work. Yeah, and for beginners, I definitely recommend it. You know, this may be something you do for a little while, and if you're like some people, you know, once you do it, master it, it's on to the next hobby, and you don't want to get too much invested. But if you can afford it and you don't mind the maintenance, absolutely, copper's definitely awesome. You know, and we have lots of good copper steel builders that'd be more than happy to put you in one, and it is the Cadillac of the steels. You know, I'm not gonna lie. You know, it's definitely that has benefits, but those come at a cost, and you know maintenance and upfront costs are those costs. But it is better. I'm not going to say it's not, but the amount of it, the amount of how much better it is has been diminished because of the mesh and being able to use Rashi rings, copper Rashi rings, or whatever to help remove some of the sulfites. Yes, it will. It's 9 o'clock now. It's definitely. Uh-oh. I had my internet went out yesterday, so I had to move my moonshine off the floor over here. So I'm gonna have to walk in here and get me a jar. I'll be right back. Oh man, that 130 fire. That made my face red. It may have been the root beer conversation. We were talking about saffrole or sassafras and saffrole and what, you know, the other things that we won't talk about. But yeah, I don't remember it's hard to say. I'm gonna have to watch that episode again and see what it was, and then talk to Facebook and you know explain to them. You know, I've watched a lot of podcasting, and you know I've seen, you know, game streamers and podcasters on YouTube and Facebook sit there and just openly smoke weed and you know and talk about it and stuff. And I don't know. I just don't. I'll have to watch it and see what we did was so bad, but I can't imagine. You know, maybe I said something stupid. I don't know. We'll see. Yeah, and that's why when I say come in, it is science is science, and we tell people these things as a warning, not here's how you do it. We tell people that as a warning. That, you know, this is something that's very toxic. You know, they make this hardcore drug from it. It's gonna hurt you. You know, it's not good. You know, we weren't trying to say, oh, here's how you do this. You know, so eh, yeah, it could have been the mushrooms, didn't we? I don't know if we talked about mushrooms or not. Mimosas, I don't know. Who knows? That's silly. I don't think it's anything major. Hopefully, it's not something we can not recover from, but we'll just have to see. Good question. You know, oats, you know, a lot of people will buy them. It depends on how you get them, right? If you get them fresh like that, yeah, you're going to have to cook them up. But a lot of times, if you get flaked oats, those have already been steamrolled and, you know, pretty much ready to go. You know, they've been gelatinized from the steamrolling process, so you don't have to worry about cooking them to break up the starches, you know, and get those out. A lot of times though, people are using the oats more for the mouth feel than necessarily the starch content from them. But wheat for sure, you can malt your wheat, which is awesome, and you can, it softens the taste and makes it, you can use less amylase, and you can depend on that wheat to help do your conversions, right? And it at the right temperature, so you can cut back on your alpha amylase use and use, the malted wheat, or you can just, you know, roll the wheat, flake it, grind it. A lot of people, I'm trying to think of the terminology they use. It's a kind of like a crushed wheat, and just crushing it, not necessarily milling it to a powder, but just crushing it, rolling it, run it through a roller or whatever process. But the finer the grind, the more you tend to get out of it, but the more it gets milky and hard to clear. So a good crushing, would work pretty well, or a coarse grind. Yeah, I think we'll get past it. I just gotta contact him. I just gotta listen to that episode again, see what it was, and no, we've never promoted drug use or anything on here. Some people might talk a little bit about smoking weed or something. And, I might talk about my old days. Maybe I'm not gonna say nothing, but who knows? But it's like, would they say the same thing to some of these top podcasters? Joe Rogan, on there talking about his days of all the shit that he's done. They broadcast that shit, right? Yeah, that's different. He brings in more money than what we would. Yeah, so I think it's something like that too. And you better believe I'll be bringing that shit up. So yeah, you post Joe Rogan shit, and they talk about that every episode, man. What the fuck? Awesome. Well, we're here to answer your questions, brother. Got your first mash going. That's good. Yep. Yeah. Now you learn to do the full grain conversions, and I'm not sure what your first mash was. What was your first mash, Don? And congratulations, brother. Yeah, I'm going to. Yeah, Eric. And as far as mashing them, when people talk about their mash, that's talking about the fermentation. They've already, it's not the physical grinding. So I thought you were talking about the physical grinding and how you should break them up and treat them when you get them. And so uh, if you're going to do an all wheat or wheat with corn, that's fine. You just gelatinize your wheat. Now you're going to have to use special enzymes to help break down the glutens if you're going to use 100% wheat, because it gets real gooey and thick, and it's going to be a little bit different than a predominant corn run. And it's probably not the best for starters. That's a little bit more complex. So corn's cheaper, and if you make any mistakes in the beginning, it's not a costly mistake. But wheat's pretty cheap too. But cooking your yeast up, it's going to get very gluteny because it's different than corn. Corn gelatinizes and gets thick and creamy, and but yeast gets very, in oats both get very gluteny, and it very sticky and very a little bit more difficult to work with. So there's specific enzymes that will help break those down. And what's some of the ones Clint uses? I've not used them yet. We're going to get some and use them. I got them written down here somewhere in what's one of my little notes here. I think Clint's going. Yeah, here we go. Sebstar or Sebflow, Sebamil or Viscoseb. Viscoseb probably the best one for that. and it breaks down those glutens. And once you use it, you'll understand what I mean by breaking it down. It'll be real thick and gooey, and you've eaten oatmeal, when it's real thick. And once you add this enzyme, it just turns thin like water. It thins it out really well, really quickly, and it's amazing how quickly they work and how little it takes for them to work. It's magic, man. Almost, man, it's crazy. But so we're going to kind of walk through, since we got a few beginners here that are trying to talk about start to finish. We're gonna go through a little bit. Yeah, it would be Farm to Bottle or Maggie Valley, two great ones to come see everybody. Um, yeah, Maggie or Farm to Bottle, both are good. What's up, JJ? Did you making some Santa shine? Man, it's good stuff, man. I like the cinnamon, adding the red hots and stuff and trying to make some of that. What's that liquor? I've never bought it commercially. The spicy red hot liquor. What's that called? I can't remember what it's called. Fireball. That's it. Fireball cinnamon. But yeah, cinnamon, and I have tried that. Now I remember. Or that, I've tried somebody's moonshine that was Fireball, basically. Yeah, good stuff. I like it. And you can do the spearmint or the peppermint or different ones and get different. Yeah, it's all a lot of fun. But for the beginners on here, we've got several, and they're wanting to know, like Eric and Jay. We got several in here. Basically, to make a corn mash, you're going to want to start with a cracked corn, or a cornmeal, or buy some corn and have it grind it up or have it ground. Probably easiest to start with just a cracked corn from your feed supply store. Everybody's like, "Oh, animal feed." No, it's just corn cracked up, right? It's yellow dent number 2 corn. It's the same corn that goes into your tortilla chips and some of your corn meals to make corn bread and everything else. So it's not like it's a different grade or something that's nasty because it's animal feed or something like that. It's just what they sell this corn. It's the same corn. Some people buy it for making tortillas. Some people buying it for cracking. Some people buy it for making sweet feeds. So they all buying the same yellow dent number 2, right? So get you start with that. Start with some cracked corn and get you some high temp amylase and some liquid glucoamylase, and you'll be ready to make some corn liquor, right? And so you take the cracked corn and you heat some water up, get it boiling hard. So you'll want about 2 and 2.25 pounds of corn, cracked corn, for every gallon of water. So I guess if you use half a bag, which is 50-pound bag, so half a bag's 25 pounds. So that'd be 10 gallons of water and 25 pounds of corn, right? So that's 2.5 pounds per gallon. Now you probably cheat and go a little bit more water as we go, but start with that. Get that water boiling hard and slowly add that cracked corn into it. And as you get all the corn in there stirred up good, turn your heat off and just let it steep. And have you on the side, have you a gallon or two of water going and boiling. That way you can keep this pot warm. You want to keep it at the same temperature. You want to keep it about 190, 85, 90 degrees for about 90 minutes to 2 hours, right? And if you don't want to write all this down, I've got a little step-by-step guide on the DIY Shine and Steel Building page, or in the Moonshine Militia page. So you can just go in there and get a simple steps to mashing in. But so Clint's going to answer just individual questions while I go over this with y'all. So the ones that are interested in this, just kind of listen in, and the ones that have other questions, if you have that, go ahead and type those in, and Clint can take care of those as I deal with these. But for those of you that are, if you have questions let me just go ahead and scroll on down to the bottom. That way, if you have any questions, I can do it as we go. you will want to use cracked corn. Let's start with cracked corn. It's a lot less expensive than sweet corn or frozen corn or canned corn. That's so much more expensive. It's not even funny. So, but flake corn, yes, you can use flake corn. And when you use flake corn, you don't have to do this cooking process and this steeping process I'm talking about, because in the flaking process, it gets steamrolled, and that steamrolling process gelatinizes the corn. So it's already been gelatinized and all the starches have been pulled out. So and hydrolyzed, so you don't have to worry about that. So you can just start at 185-degree water and then add your high temp amylase, which is added at 185 degrees, and break down those starches and then let it cool. And if you have any adjunct grains you want to add, you can. If you don't, let it cool to about 140 degrees and then add your liquid glucose, and check your labels on all your enzymes now, because different enzymes will have you use them at different temperatures. Most of your liquid high temp will do 185, but some of the liquid glucose will be 140, some of it's 100, and depending on the formulation. So I think some of it may be more geared towards a beta glucanase that you would add it at 140, and I think that the true glucoamylase would be closer to 100. But different formulations, different enzymes from different sources may require different temperatures. So always resort to your label on your enzymes, um, and just go with what those have. But so you let it cool, and basically what you're doing is when you cook your corn, you're breaking the starches out of your corn, right? You're getting leaching all the starches out of the cells. It's basically an endosperm that feeds these cells for the growth, right? And you're taking all that starch and you're breaking it out of the kernel and freeing it into the water solution. And then when you add the amylase, it breaks down all these complex starches, which are big, huge branches of uh, bonded or glucose molecules. Let me show you a picture of them here. It's get a little bit advanced, but it might help you understand. And tag on it. I wish screenshots saved in the same place I keep my other pictures and stuff. I keep going from screenshots to this back and forth. But like this, see, this is starch. This is amylopectin, and this is amylose. So you can see amylopectin's branched, right? And your amylose is more of like a pearl necklace. But these are all just glucose molecules bonded together by glycosidic bonds. And your amylase will go in there and break a lot of these up, chop up a lot of these into smaller segments, right? So it's kind of like going through a weed whacker, or run it through a chipper. It's just going to break all this up into smaller little pieces, right? But those smaller pieces still aren't small enough for a yeast to be able to consume. They're still complex sugars. They're just oligosaccharides instead of polysaccharides. See, these are both complex polysaccharides, poly meaning many. And then you break them down to oligosaccharides, meaning anywhere from 3 to 12 or 13 molecules in a string, and that's something that your yeast can't eat, right? So you follow up after you debranch with the alpha amylase. You follow up with a glucose or a beta glucanase, one of the two. Glucose tends to be a little bit better, and it debranches those into one or two molecules, right? So it chops it on up into where these are just one or two little dots, right? And they're all just free floating. They're all no longer bonded together. And that's something that your yeast can eat. So that's how we convert a complex starch using the amylase to break it all up into small, simple pieces that the yeast can eat. So that's the process explained pretty simply. It can get very scientific in how those glycosidic bonds and how water molecules bond to each and sever those and cleave. They call it cleaving those bonds. But in simple terms, that's how it works. We're just breaking all those bonds up and breaking them down into single molecules, which is a monosaccharide, mono meaning one, or a disaccharide, di meaning two sugars bonded, right? And so basically that's how we get sugars that the yeast can eat from a corn. And believe it or not, you can get those sugars cheaper and easier. Well, maybe not easier, but cheaper than buying a bag of sugar and using it. That's why all these places that make gasohol and make ethanol for gas, that's why they use corn. It's cheaper and more, not as efficient and easy. It's very easy to dissolve sugar, but it's a lot more expensive. So it's a lot cheaper to do this, and it's how I recommend everybody learn. I learned by just taking sugar, cornmeal, and yeast and making what's called a thin mash. That's another cheap, easy way to learn. And some people learn by making a sugar wash, just sugar and some oyster shells to keep it, buffered, and then just add some yeast to that, and just that's the most simple as it gets. Very hot. It works off fast, but it's very hot liquor. But it's a quick and easy way to learn, and a lot of people do that to make a sacrificial run. So the first run on their still a lot of times will be a sacrificial run. That way, and it's something you're not going to drink, right? So you're running first thing you do is you run boiling water through it. If it's copper, and you're going to want to run some vinegar through it, right? And then you want to run a sacrificial run because water has certain things that it'll break down, that it dissolves in water, that it's a solvent for some things. Some things not. Acid, with your vinegar run, you get some acids in there. That'll break down. Some things are solute in vinegar and acid, so it'll dissolve those. Some things like your oils, manufacturing oils and something like that, may take an alcohol to actually remove. And a lot of those greases, water doesn't touch, vinegar doesn't touch, but an alcohol will help remove. Fluxes, most modern fluxes should be, pretty much water soluble, but a lot of the manufacturing greases that they use in stamping out these big uh, stainless pots, those get, I mean, that grease coming from that hydraulic ram that comes down and presses that flat plate into a round pot, and then they trim it and then they polish it. So you're getting polishing compounds, you're getting greases, manufacturing oils and stuff in that, and it's like in the pores of that stainless. You really have to clean it well. Just a regular once over with Dawn ain't going to cut it. I recommend taking a white rag and some just regular isopropyl alcohol that you get to pour on your cuts and stuff. This is not something you're drinking. It evaporates. It's not something that remains in your steel, but you can use that on a rag to kind of get alcohol, some of the oils out that the Dawn won't get. And you can tell by looking at that rag once you're done, it'll be gray, and you'll have removed some buffing compounds and some manufacturing greases that the Dawn didn't take care of. So a lot of people will run the sacrificial runs in your new steels to do that. And that's something that you want to be sure. Another thing, if you do get a copper steel, make sure that you put a valve in the cap, and after you finish each run, make sure you open that valve up, or else you run the risk of your steel imploding. If you have a thumper in line, the risk increases exponentially because it doesn't have free flowing air, so it sucks moisture back from the thumper, but it's just not enough, and it'll actually it'll implode on you. And I've seen that happen more often than you think. It happens more often than you think, very often. So that's something that you got to be careful of. Yeah, you want to be careful with the hydrogen peroxide. You don't want to use that on your copper. We used to think that 551 was a good thing until people started talking about it around people in the industry and stuff. They're like, "Oh no, that's too harsh." The hydrogen peroxide, and basically this is a good mixture if you want to spray it on some copper and have it turn green and look aged and patinaed and have like a copper filigree and all that oxidized copper. It's great for that because it's heavily acidic, and that hydrogen peroxide really, it's an accelerant. It's an oxidizer, and it makes it a lot harsher. So if you look under a microscope at a copper sheet, it's got some pits and stuff, but it's fairly smooth. And after you go over it with some of this hydrogen peroxide stuff, it pits it, and it creates pits. And when you get that pitting, you create more surface area, and you've actually created more area to oxidize. So you got to be careful, and it's great if you want to, if you have like some old copper that's just got green all over it and it's just ruined. If you can't use anything else, I would try some other commercial products on it, barkeepers and other stuff, before I would actually do that. But we tend to stay away from the hydrogen peroxide and just use the citric acid and water. And you can get the vinegar, or citric acid. You can get citric acid, I think, from Home Depot in pretty high percentages, but you can just buy citric acid mixed with water. It's something that you're going to use for other things anyway, so it's good to have on hand. But yeah, you got to cook the corn to release those starches, and then use that high temp at 185, and then let it cool. And like if you're going to add like a malted grain, you can use a little bit less of the high temp alpha and add your malts at 135, 45, depending on the malt that you use. And I can post you a little chart here that'll show you. This is also something that we have in the files there on the group pages. So if you want to join in there, you can see it. But this is something you should have on your phone and everybody should have. And it shows you basically what temperatures that you want to add these specific grains into your mash. Now, corn, maize at the top, we're not going to really pay attention to those, because that's if you're using, like, if you're wanting to utilize the enzymes in the corn. Now, if you want to convert corn and malt it and let it convert itself, that's a very long cooking process, and it's a very low temp long cooking process. So your temperature will have to be about 145, 50, and you'll have to go for many, 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 many hours. So it's much quicker, much more efficient to use the enzymes, which is what everybody does. Hardly, very few people malt the corn and use that process anymore. It's kind of an old school way of doing it. It's great, but it's just not very efficient. If you have a wood fire and you got coals and you're just feeding the stick underneath there every once in a while for 12 hours, that's kind of good. But if you're trying to use gas and you're kind of heat this for, cook it for 10, 12 hours at that low temperature in order to lightenize it, it takes a much, much longer time. It's not very efficient. If you're using, a stove, you can do that. It's more efficient that way, but it takes a long, long time. And it's just, most people don't have the patience, and it's just, there's not that much benefit to doing it that way anymore, because, you get there might be some difference in flavor, but is it worth that difference in time? I don't know. That's something individuals have to determine, and most people wouldn't be able to tell the difference in taste. Some might, and if that's the case, is it still worth it? And it's like, no, it's not. So it's 90 minutes to a couple of hours at 185, or 10 to 12 hours at 145, right? It's going to be a long, long, arduous process. But if we cook the corn at the higher temp and add that high temp alpha, we can add less of that if we want to use some malted grains. Right? You can buy malted barley, or you can easily malt. You can get some wheat and easily malt that, and stop the malting process. You malt it, you get the little roots coming out, and you stop it. And the little radicals, they call them, coming out, the little starter roots, and you stop it immediately. Crush those roots off, dry it out, get those roots off there. They're very bitter, and then grind those up, and you can use those as a malted grain. It's probably not going to be good as if a malt house does it, if you do it at home, but it's still, okay. And if you have that little bit of high temp alpha helping you out, you can cheat a little bit, not have as good a malt, conversion, and it be fine. Add those in at 140, 45, and this chart right here will tell you, like if you've got barley malt, right here, 145, 47.5 to 150, almost 152.5. So in that range is a perfect time to add your barley malt. It won't denature, and you want to hold it at that temperature for a little while so those enzymes will have time to take an effect on the mash, right? Stir it up real well and hold it at that temperature. The wheat, you can see is a little bit right below it, a little lower temperature. The rye, even lower temperature. So if it's malted, it's the barley. If it's not malted, it'd be a little lower temperature. But if it's malted, you want to go in a little higher temperature and activate those malts or those enzymes. But this chart gives pretty much all the different ones. But pretty much most of the grains, if you add them in the green there, you're going to be okay. If it's malted, you're going to have to handle it a little differently. But it's not going to kill your rye flavor if you add the rye and it's not malted at 145 and instead of 135, right? So, yeah. But it's a great chart to have on you, so you know what temps, if you do have other malted adjunct grains, what temps to add it. But using the exogenous enzymes is definitely the way to go anymore. Eliminates a lot of the malting process and just simplifies things, a lot. Yeah, yeah. When you run your steam run, you're not going to have any coolant in there. So you want it to get hot. You want it to steam all the way down. You don't want it condensing at the very beginning and just running through as liquid, because only the bottom part that the liquid touches will get the actual contact of the vinegar water. So you want that steam to go all the way through. That way you get good contact on the top as well, right? I didn't see JJ singing that. Not JJ. Thanks for joining in, brother. Yeah, I think so too. And especially on the outside, a lot of people tend to polish and over clean and just over acidify and overdo it. It's best to let your copper get like an old penny, but when it does get over oxidized like that, it's less effective in removing sulfites. So again, with the mesh, but you gotta have it. You gotta have the actual sulfite be able to come into contact with the copper. So in your cap, probably be good to keep a clean cap where it actually comes into contact, because in the boiler, it really doesn't. Only the outside, whatever's on the outside of that, comes into contact with the mesh on the outside, the mash on the outside, and it doesn't really come into contact with a high percentage of the mash itself, right? All the rest is a very low percentage that actually touches that copper in the pot. But once it's forced into a smaller tube, then you get a lot more contact. So in your cap, it's being forced into your cap. It holds in that cap. You get some reflux in that cap, so it's touching that copper a lot more. You got that line arm cone coming down, so it's coming down and getting smaller. So it's accelerating. You're getting a dwell time, and you're getting you know contact there and all through. If you have a copper worm, you're getting contact all the way through that. So that's great. But if you're using copper mesh, every bit of it gets forced through that mesh. If you have a decent, now I will say, if you have a small steel, don't try to pack copper mesh into a small copper pipe and use that way. Do not, because it's just going to clog things up and you're going to run the risk of exploding. Please do not do that. Don't misunderstand me at all. The ones I'm talking about putting the copper mesh in are large, 1.5 inch, 2 inch spools, right? They're this large. That's what we see on this keg right here. That's a 2 inch. That's a 2 inch ferrule on the top, and that's a 2 inch spool coming off. So it's not some 3/8 inch line. Don't ever try to put copper in a little teeny copper line like that. We're packing that mesh in these larger stainless spools, right? So I want to make sure that everybody understands that. I don't want somebody, you said to pack it in my line, I'm packing in this 3/8 inch line, and now it exploded. No, please, no, don't try to do that. So, but these are large, handles large volumes. And it doesn't get clogged up like that, and especially higher up. So if you keep it down here in your sight glass, you can see if it's going to get clogged up or if you're not getting good vapor passing through. But if you put it above your deflator or deflagmator here on that column, it's not going to be a problem. Cheers. Isn't alcohol considered a drug? Maybe they just don't like talking about alcohol. Good. Blackberry pineapple. Yeah, you want it packed pretty loosely so the vapors can freely flow through it. It just needs contact with with the copper. Just the sulfites contact the copper and they just stick to it. So yeah, you don't want to be putting it in anything small, for sure. Definitely do not. It is. It's good starter steel, and it's very durable. And you take that column off there, and just have the keg sitting in the corner. It's a beer keg, right? Nobody looks at that and says, "Oh, that's a moonshine steel." No, it's a beer keg, right? So it kind of disguises itself. Where you got that sitting in the corner. Well, that's a funny looking stock pot. yeah. But if you take the football and the condenser, the canister condenser off there, it just looks like a double boiler, right? And that's what you tell people it is. It's just it's a boiler. It's a pressure cooker. And you can actually get pressure cooker, parts and put on this and make a pressure cooker out of it if you want to. I'll tell you why. If you got honey, I got you a pressure cooker for Christmas. Just hide that football in that canister, right? Let her use it for canning and stuff, because it does have like a false bottom there to set your cans and jars on and stuff. She, oh, honey, thank you so much. And then when she's gone, you start running the hoops through there, right? That'll work. Yeah, I missed your question, Mark. I'm sorry, I get too busy talking. Yeah, like Clint's talking about, if your lid arm angles up, it's gonna, you're gonna get that dwell time, you're gonna get that contact, but it condenses and then it has a chance, anything in the bottom drains back in, right? So if it's straight out, so you get higher proof, less flavor, higher proof when it angles up. If it angles straight out, you get pretty good, passive reflux from the cooling effect. Some will go this way, some will go that way because it's flat. So you'll get some draining back in, some draining into the worm. But like in the Kentucky rigs, they're angled down. And that gets no reflux at all. Nothing goes back into the steel. It all goes down, and that maximizes flavor and minimizes it cuts your proof down, but it'll maximize your flavor. Well, you got to add the parts to it. You got to have the little, up on the top where it's got that cap. You just get I've got it, and where it's got the cap, you just drill it out, tap it, and screw in a little pressure thing. And then right next to that, it's 2.5 inch, so it's pretty decent size. Right next to that, you put your little weight with your little whistler, and you thread that in there. I bought it. I've got it. And you put that little weight on there, and you can literally use it as a pressure cooker. Sure can. But yeah, the benefit of the kegs is people see it, they don't see a steel, and they're very durable. They'll last forever, and your grandchildren will be using it. One of the issues is you can't use a flat burners. You couldn't use a stove or an induction or anything like that on it because it's the bottom, rim is set up, and it doesn't have the good contact. So there's trade-offs. Yeah, kegs are pretty good. They make a pretty durable steel, and you can get these. Like I say, Fieldly can make you some caps. All the makers out there can make caps for it that'll fit that just perfectly. Uh, Run cap the lid arm off there, or you could run a little tower, or you could go off there into a 3 inch or 4 inch, column, and increase, put you the flame meter on there above your column, and crank out some high proof vodka. It's pretty versatile once you get those tri-clamp fittings, and that's the benefit of that keg. It has one on top, and so does this one right underneath that football. You can see a little tri-clamp fitting, and they're very modular. And that's the beauty of the keg, and the football steel is the modularity of it and how you can adapt them for different distillates, right? So if you want to make some vodka, you can throw in that column and get some more reflux, or if you want a brandy, you can put on a football head, or get you a good copper cap for it. If you want to have some copper, buying a copper cap or making a copper cap and then using a copper worm, that's really putting the copper where the copper needs to be. And you can go that route if you want the benefit of all that copper, or you can just use the mesh. Yeah, yeah, he's one of the few that actually does. There's a few that sell parts and stuff. Not all of them carry kegs, but yeah, he's got kegs on hand, and he can get you, ferrules welded into the sides, the bottom, so you can put your elements in there. He can sell you the elements, the controllers, the caps. I mean, he can sell you everything you need to get going with the keg. It's going to be a lot cheaper than having a 15-gallon copper. For sure. 15-gallon copper steel. I'm not going to quote what they're doing, but I don't know of anybody doing them less than $1,000 or so. But if you go with a stainless keg, and you get your controller and all that stuff, you're gonna have less than half that, or around half that in it, and be ready to go. Yep. Go ready to go. OldFieldBillyMoonshine.com. He can hook you up. Yeah, a lot of people will do that, or they'll cut that 2 inch off the top and add them a 4 inch to make it a little easier to get in there and clean out. Uh, and then you can have a little 4 inch reducer, go from 4 inch down to 2 inch for your column if you want to go there. Out, it does it. That was my biggest issue when I ran a keg steel. And I did that before a lot of this welding ferrules and all that ever came about. They didn't have much of that back in the 80s. I'm sure they had it, but um, it was very expensive, and it just wasn't commonplace. We didn't have Amazon or anywhere we could just shop for it right in Eastern Kentucky. But my biggest issue is when I was running the keg is cleaning it. I didn't couldn't afford a pressure washer, and I didn't have no way of cleaning the inside. And I'd try to fill it up, shake it, and get it, and it just never. So I'd have to take it to the car wash and spray it out in the car wash. And I'm sure people wonder why the hell I was cleaning the beer keg in the car wash. But every once in a while, I have to go, clean it out a little bit, grudge and sludge. If you notice at the very top of the mash line where it bubbles up, it'll always foam up. You can't boil water without it foaming up. So it's always going to foam, and that foam, hits the sides and it just sticks, and then it just builds up a little sludge, and it's kind of hard to get to. But now they got pressure washers with these rotary heads that spray out the sides, and those are perfect for this. I mean, they're good for cleaning pipes. So if you got a hose or something, you can put them on a hose and run it down a pipe or a gutter or a drain pipe, and it just sprays around in circles. And you probably run it, use a lower pressure, if you're going to do that for a lot of your French drains and stuff. But you can put those rotaries down into a keg, and it just sprays out the sides, and it cleans the sides real well. So those are good to have too. Yeah, he's got a lot of good stuff. Yep, and they can build you anything you want. And we got a lot of talented builders in the community. There's a lot of them and very talented. So don't go with some unknown. Always check with somebody, especially if you're going to spend thousands of dollars on a copper steel. Make sure that you talk to somebody in the groups, an admin or somebody in the groups, and we can give you a list of trustworthy people. We've got quite a few members in the community that do excellent work, and and we can make some recommendations for you. And a lot of these guys work together. A lot of them are backed up. A lot of them are like, man, I can get you one, but it's going to be 6-8 months, man. We're so backed up. And a lot of them will say, give old Philbilly a call, or call Bruce, or call, Wayne at Ozark, call, because they all work together. Now those guys may be backed up too and say, I'm pretty backed up as well. I heard, Wayne, or, different people may not be, so give them a call. Or James, I'm not going to name names, because as soon as I do, Sean, Tracy, there's just too many people, and I'll always leave somebody out, and I hate even beginning that. That's why I just always say Philbilly and some of the others, because inevitably I'm going to leave out Sean Peterman, or Wayne at Ozark, or Tracy, or Adam, or I mean, there's just so many of good artisans that we've got, man. And Jason Wade, Bruce, I just don't want to leave anybody out, so I try not to name drop, and just we got so many, Appalachians, there's so many of them, that do great work. But there's some that'll fuck you over just as bad too, and we know who those are. So we know who to tell you not to use this as well. And I don't care what they like it or not. You screw so many people over, and everybody in the community talks about it. I will get a good recommendation, and deservedly so. And you can whine to everybody you want to and lawyer up, but we're free to talk about who we want, and we do have that freedom, and we can back it up with some facts. So make sure that you get it from somebody reputable, and talk to some people. Yeah, and well, and like he's talking about, you have that drain on the bottom, but if you do that, you also, that's a lot of people do that for like fermenting, as a fermenter. Because if you got that drain on the bottom, it's going to be awful hard to heat on the bottom. So if you'd have to almost use an element if you're going to flip it upside down like that, then you're pretty much going to have to put an element in it to use the teasing, because you can't heat where you got that butterfly valve or whatever on the bottom. So if you have an element, you do, and you can make good little fermenters out of those too. But it's kind of an overkill thing. I think just the big blue barrels work so well for big fermenters. We don't, you don't need all that. And you can put a drain in those if you want to. A bulkhead fitting and drain works in those fairly well. But yeah, it sure is. And generally the ones that are busiest are have either the best prices or the best work. but we got a lot of craftsmen. I hope I didn't forget anybody. I'm sure I did. Well, there's just so many of them, you know. If I did forget you, I apologize. I try to remember everybody. I need to make a list. I keep saying that, but I try to make sure that I can try to remember everybody. And if I forgot you, then you need to stay a little closer to Sandy. You send me a little message every once in a while. We're getting about 10 o'clock, and I'm gonna have to get off here, and I'm gonna have to start the process. We're gonna have to Clint and I are gonna uh, see what we said in that one. We're gonna sit and watch it again and see what potentially could have been said, and then work up a response for Facebook. Yeah, if you're making mead, you're already halfway there. You know how to ferment. It takes time to do mead. So you've got the patience already established. Uh, yeah, you can shine and still run for office. Just don't talk about it, and don't use your real name. And maybe once you get in office, you can help legislate and get this shit legal. It should be a legal hobby for people to do. You can make beer and you can make wine, but you can't distill it. They don't even let you make wine and freeze it. It's not even going into a pot and being distilled. It's called freeze distillation. Freeze, no, it's called jacking. What it's called. They want to put distillation on there to just so they can hang it into the illegal aspect of it. But yeah, you can't even take wine, put it in a bucket, set it outside in the freezing temperature, let the water freeze up in it, pull the water out, and when you pull that water out, you leave, of course, a more concentrated alcohol because you're just removing the alcohol or the water from the alcohol, right? But you're using freezing temperatures to do it. So it's called jacking. And it give you a hell of a hangover. It's terrible things to drink and do. But, you know, people that drink will do what they're going to do. Yeah, there's a lot of crooks in politics, man. I mean, look, well, we don't want to get involved in too much of that. But, yeah, there's so much waste and fraud. And not just on one side of the aisle, it's on both. So I'm not going to point at one side and not the other. There's a lot of people on both sides fighting and arguing. It seems like these days we can't have peaceful conversations about certain topics. And used to, we could agree to disagree, sit and have a drink, laugh and joke, cut up, and still be buddies, right? No, these days, man, it's cancer culture. You say something they don't like, and you're finished. I'll never listen to you. I'm going to preach. I'm going to come to your house and pick it, man. I mean, they just go crazy. So yeah, you just we try to stay away from all that and just talk about making liquor, trying to stay away from talking about drugs. I don't know how in the hell this has happened, but maybe I said something stupid about my past or something. I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, exactly. Joe Rogan, how many times he talked about all these psychedelics and all these drugs and illegal drugs on his thing and all this mad honey and all this shit and fentanyl and all these other things, and they'll stream his ass day and night. It's a lot of these other people, but yeah. Yeah, did you see my post? That's funny as shit, ain't it? That's funny as fuck, man. I stole that off somebody else. That wasn't me. That wasn't my original. I stole that. But that's some funny shit, man. It's got a picture of Tony Soprano driving the car, and he's got that mad look on his face. And he said, "Me driving to work at 6 o'clock, thinking I should have just opened up a Somali daycare center, man. I could have been a millionaire, man. Yeah, I'm working my ass off. I could just opened up shop and had a building, put two people out front, smoke and act like they're doing something, and make a million. It's unbelievable the corruption that's going on in our country that's going unchecked, and it's not unchecked. It's a lot of kickbacks. A lot of people get kickbacks that are supposed to be watching and making sure this doesn't happen. And where's our media been? Where's the media? They're too busy wanting to impeach Trump for building a ballroom with his own money instead of doing investigative journalism like they used to do back in the day. And I don't care if you're investigating Democrats or Republicans, either one, find the corruption and investigate that. You know, get this TDS off your mind and get over it. He's our president. Get past it and just find something else, man. It's just crazy. But it's just bad. Yeah, we appreciate you too, brother. Yep, I love my friendships I've made with a lot of people, man. I'm not gonna let people discourage me. I know there's a lot of people that would rather my podcast not be here so they can try to steal some of my thunder and show, and I'm not gonna let the jealousy and the all that. I don't know that I got reported. I may have. I think the time is kind of questionable, but it is what it is. I'm not gonna let them discourage me and keep me from going on. They ain't gonna keep me from doing that. Be maybe a heart attack or my health or my mind give out. Which that could happen anytime too. I'm getting up there, uh, but I don't like the stress. It does stress me a lot, and I'd rather just leave my podcast be happy without all the drama and all the bullshit. You do your thing, I'll do my thing, but we can all just get along and be happy and support each other, promote each other instead of trying to knock each other, and knock each other down and carry that hatred. I don't like it. Yep. Yep. Oh, Skirt, ask you a question, I guess. How did I not see that? I think stuff pops in there after. No, I should scroll down pretty quickly. I was gonna say I think shit just pops in there after I scroll past it. There's different types, and what you really want to get, Scurb, is you want to get the high temp alpha amylase and then the liquid glucoamylase. Those are the two that you want. You can get them on Amazon. Get them off Fieldbilly. You can get them at Firm Solutions, and those are the three people that I recommend to get them from. Oh, I didn't mention North Georgia earlier when I was talking about steel builders. Yeah, that's Andrew and them. They did great work too. So I knew I was forgetting somebody, one of the bigger ones. And there's others I know I'm forgetting, and I'm sorry if I do. It's just I need to make a list, and I try not to just. I don't want to do the name thing anymore. I'd probably just say Philbilly and ask us. We'll give you a list of people that you can trust, and you can just call them all and see who's got your turn time and your price working for you, right? Because they all pretty much is about the same price, and turn time is going to vary. But yeah, you want to get you that high temp alpha and that liquid glucose, and you can get those from Amazon. North Georgia, I think, does the same as I think it's the same stuff as Firm Solutions. I think most all that comes from the same place. And then Phil Billy's, not sure where his is sourced from, but his is good. I've not heard anybody say anything negative about his, and it's always fresh and good. So um, those are probably the best sources. I think North Georgia's is on Amazon, so if you order on Amazon, you can get that. Firm Solutions at Danville, Kentucky, uh, has larger bottles, so it's a little bit more expensive. You want to keep that in the refrigerator. So if you don't do a lot, it may go bad before you get it used because it doesn't take very much, and they sell pretty good sized jugs. But Phil and Prohibition used to do it. Now I used to always buy Prohibitions, but I think he's gotten kind of away from that, and I think he deals with. I think he sells his through North Georgia now, and that's just on Amazon. So any of those is fine. I recommend Phil. He's our buddy, and about the same price, shipping about the same price, and support your local shiner. He's a good old boy. Well, it's 10 o'clock. We're gonna get out of here, and I guess Clint and I are gonna have to sit and watch the 3 hour episode from the 22nd and see what was said on there, and see if we can figure out how we're going to talk to Facebook about it, and plan a strategy, I guess. So either way, we'll be back here Saturday, whether it be on Facebook or not. I'll just do it on YouTube, and if Facebook don't want to carry it and don't want to forgive us, maybe I can get somebody else to log us on and we can still do it through somebody else. But hopefully this didn't affect Fieldbillies, stuff as well. So we'll have to just wait and see. But we'll see Saturday one way or the other, and we'll get the word out for everybody on Facebook. If they have to come to YouTube to watch it, so be it. That'll just have to be the way it is. But we'll try to get it worked out. Yeah, I know, brother. Yeah. But yeah, we'll get you. We'll get y'all back on, and we'll try to get it back on Facebook. Yeah, Jay, we're on here every Tuesday and Saturday, 8 Eastern. So bring us your questions. Also join the group on Facebook, DIY Shine and Steel Building, and that's capital DIY Shine and Steel Building, or Moonshine Militia. If you join the Moonshine Militia, just tell them that you came from Old Santa's podcast and that you want to join. And if they don't let you in, just come to DIY Shine and Steel Building. We ask the same questions there and have files there for you as well. But good deal. Good deal. All right, but if you want to join the Facebook groups, you don't have to join under your name. So you can use in DIY Shine and Steel Building, you can use an alias or a nickname. So if you're an aspiring politician, you can kind of join in there indiscreetly. You know what I'm saying, Jay? So anyway, great seeing everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and we see you cats on Saturday night. Have a great week. Shine on, y'all. Later.